My mom justified my girlfriend's cheating. She provoked it because she wanted me to take care of her more. She said my mom told her it was the only way to make me see what I had, to make me appreciate her more. She wanted to teach me a lesson. It wasn't just betrayal, it was planned. And now, as I'm trying to process all of this, my mom is at my door, defending it. Before all this, my life was simple. I wasn't out chasing relationships or trying to find the one. I already had responsibilities, a son who depended on me that I had been married before. My ex-wife and I were together for years, and we had a child. But things fell apart, and she left. She didn't fight for custody. She didn't even try to stay in our son's life. I was a single dad, fully committed to raising him on my own. Dating wasn't a priority. It wasn't even on my radar. For years, I tried. But every time I thought about putting myself out there, I hesitated. My son always came first. And after enough failed attempts, I just stopped trying. That's when my mother stepped in. She always insisted that I needed someone, that my son needed a mother figure, that I was wasting my life by staying single. I ignored her, but she didn't give up. She started pushing me toward a woman she knew, the daughter of her old college friend. According to my mom, she was perfect for me. Smart, kind, family-oriented. She convinced me to meet her, just once. I wasn't excited, but I agreed. And that's how I met the woman who would later betray me. When I met her, I wasn't expecting much. My mother had set up the meeting like it was fate, but I knew better than to believe in that kind of thing. I went in with zero expectations, just trying to get it over with so my mom would stop nagging me. But I'll admit, she was nice. She listened when I talked, asked about my son, didn't seem put off by the fact that I was a single dad. It was rare to find someone who didn't see my situation as baggage. So, against my better judgment, I let my guard down a little. Things moved faster than I expected. We started seeing each other regularly. My son liked her, or at least tolerated her, and that was enough for me. Before long, she was staying over more often, and eventually, we just stopped pretending she had her own place. We were living together. I still gave most of my attention to my son. That was never going to change. He had already lost his mother, and I wasn't about to let him feel second place to a new woman in my life. She said she understood. She said she admired how dedicated I was. But looking back, I think that was just something she told herself she could handle. I didn't see the warning signs. The nights where she looked distant when I canceled a date because my son needed me. The moments where she seemed irritated when I chose to help him with something instead of sitting next to her on the couch. She never fought me about it, not openly. She never once told me I was doing something wrong, but I know now that resentment was building. Maybe if things had been left alone, she would have eventually ended things. Maybe she would have just walked away. But that's not what happened. Instead, she stayed. And something, or someone, convinced her that cheating was the better option. I should have known my mother wouldn't just let things be. She had always been the type to get involved where she didn't belong, always convinced she knew what was best for me. Even when I made it clear I didn't want her interference, she saw my relationship the way she wanted to see it. In her mind, my girlfriend was perfect, and I was the problem. To her, I wasn't being a good enough partner. I wasn't giving my girlfriend enough attention. I wasn't making her feel important. And worst of all, I was still prioritizing my son over my new family. She had been having private conversations with my girlfriend for weeks, maybe months, before it all came crashing down. She told her I needed to change, but that I wouldn't do it on my own. That some men only realized what they had once they were afraid of losing it first. My girlfriend didn't agree. But my mother kept pushing. She told her it wasn't really cheating if it had a purpose. That it was just a way to wake me up. That if she went through with it, and then came back to me, I'd realize how much I loved her and finally start treating her the way she deserved. And then, the part that still makes my stomach turn, she admitted she had done the same thing to my father. She told my girlfriend that she had cheated on my dad more than once. That it had been necessary to fix their marriage. That it had worked for her, so it would work for us. Hearing that made me realize something. My entire childhood had been built on a lie. I had grown up believing my parents had a solid marriage. My dad never once mentioned anything about infidelity. But now I knew. He had been in my position once. He had been the one betrayed. And he had stayed. Maybe that's what my mother thought would happen with me too. Maybe she assumed I would just accept it the way my father had. My girlfriend finally gave in. And once she crossed that line, there was no coming back. She slept with someone else. And then, just like my mother had planned, she came to me and told me everything. Not with guilt. Not with regret. But with the expectation that I would fight for her. That was supposed to be the moment I realized I needed to change. That I needed to give her more attention. That I needed to put her above my son. Instead, it was the moment I realized I had been played. When she told me she had cheated, I stood frozen, trying to process the words she had just said. She had not confessed out of guilt or regret, but because she believed this was something that would improve our relationship. She looked at me like she was expecting a breakthrough, as if this moment was supposed to make me see what I had been too blind to realize before. She explained that my mother had convinced her I was neglecting her, that I was too focused on my son, and that I needed to understand what it felt like to lose her. My mother told her that some men only appreciated their women after experiencing the fear of losing them. She told her that infidelity, when done for the right reasons, was not real cheating but simply a way to fix an unbalanced relationship. I felt nothing but disgust. She had not been manipulated into doing this against her will. She had listened, agreed, and acted on it, fully believing that this was the right decision. She was standing in front of me, not as someone begging for forgiveness, but as someone who truly believed that she had done something that would make things better between us. I told her to leave. She froze, completely thrown off, as if she had never even considered the possibility that I would not react the way my mother said I would. She tried to explain again, insisting that my mother was right, that this was how relationships worked, and that I would understand it soon. She said my mother had done the same thing to my father, and that it had saved their marriage. I didn't want to hear another word. I grabbed a bag, threw her things inside without caring what they were, and shoved it into her hands. She stood there, still waiting for me to change my mind. Before stepping out, she warned me that if I kicked her out, my mother would be furious, and she would make sure I regretted this decision. I didn't care. I slammed the door in her face. The next morning, I was still trying to process everything when I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, I realized that my nightmare was not over. My ex-girlfriend was standing there, and beside her was my mother. When I opened the door, my mother stood next to my ex, looking at me like I was the one who had done something wrong. She didn't look disappointed in her or ashamed of what had happened. She looked angry at me. Before I could say anything, she stepped inside like she owned the place and started talking as if this was just a minor disagreement that needed to be settled. She said I had overreacted, that I was being stubborn, and that I was ruining a relationship that she had worked hard to set up for me. She told me that my ex had done exactly what needed to be done to save our relationship, and instead of appreciating it, I had thrown her out like she was nothing. I stood there in disbelief, listening to my own mother justify what had happened like it was normal. She said men sometimes needed reminders of what they had before they lost it. She said she had done the same thing to my father, and in the end, it made their marriage stronger. I asked her if my father ever found out, and she scoffed, waving her hand like it didn't matter. She said he might have suspected, but he never left, and in the end, they had a good life together. She spoke like she had done him a favor, like her betrayals had somehow improved their marriage. I looked at my ex, expecting her to at least seem guilty, but she stood there nodding, like my mother was making perfect sense. She had been completely convinced that this was right, that my mother knew best, and that I was the one who was wrong for refusing to accept it. My mother then switched tactics, lowering her voice and trying to sound reasonable. She told me to think about my future, about my son, about how hard it would be to find someone else willing to be in this situation. She told me my ex was still here because she wanted to fix things, and if I had any sense at all, I would take her back before it was too late. I had heard enough. I told them both to leave. My mother looked genuinely offended, as if she couldn't believe I was standing up to her. She told me I was being prideful and immature, that I was throwing away something good because of my ego. When I didn't respond, she told me I would regret it and stormed out, dragging my ex with her. As soon as the door shut, I stood there for a long time, realizing that I had never really known my mother at all. After my mother and ex left, I sat in silence, trying to process everything that had just happened. My own mother had not only justified the betrayal but had expected me to accept it like it was something normal. She truly believed she had done me a favor, and when I refused to play along, she acted like I was the one ruining everything. I thought that was the end of it. I assumed the worst was over. But just when I thought things couldn't get any stranger, my phone rang. When I saw the name on the screen, I almost didn't believe it. It was my ex-wife. We hadn't spoken in years. The only communication we had was the occasional email about our son, and even that was rare. She had walked out of my life a long time ago and never looked back. But now, out of nowhere, she was calling me. I answered, expecting her to ask about our son, but she immediately got to the point. She said she had heard about what happened. She knew about my girlfriend cheating. She knew about my mother's involvement. I asked her how she found out, and she admitted that my mother had called her. I wasn't even surprised at this point. My mother was probably desperate to make me see reason and had reached out to the only other woman who had been in my life. What I didn't expect was what my ex-wife said next. She told me that she had been thinking a lot about the past and that maybe, just maybe, she had made a mistake leaving. She said she had changed, that she had grown up, that she realized she had taken things for granted. Then she asked me something I never thought I would hear from her. Do you think we could try again? I sat there, stunned. The woman who abandoned me and our son was now asking if we could give things another shot. Hearing those words from my ex-wife was almost surreal. After all these years, after everything she had done, she suddenly wanted to start over like none of it had ever happened. I asked her why she was saying this now, after all this time, after leaving me to raise our son alone without a second thought. She hesitated before admitting that she had been feeling lost lately. She said things hadn't turned out the way she thought they would after she left, and hearing about my situation made her realize what she had walked away from. I didn't know whether to laugh or be furious. When she left, she didn't hesitate. She didn't look back. She didn't care that she had abandoned not just me, but our child. And now, suddenly, she wanted to try again just because her own life hadn't gone the way she wanted. I asked her if she was serious, or if she was just lonely. She got defensive, saying she had been reflecting on her past mistakes and wanted to make things right. She even brought up our son, saying it would be better for him if we were together again. That was when I shut the conversation down. I told her that she had her chance. I reminded her that she wasn't just some ex-girlfriend from my past. She was someone who had walked out on her own child. I told her I wasn't interested in pretending that never happened just because she suddenly felt regret. She tried to keep talking, insisting that people change, that she could be a better partner and mother now, but I had heard enough. I told her not to contact me about anything unless it was about our son. Then I ended the call. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, realizing how insane the past few days had been. First, my mother had tried to manipulate me into accepting betrayal. Now, my ex-wife had suddenly decided she wanted me back. It felt like everyone around me was trying to control my life, as if I was just supposed to accept whatever they threw at me. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had spent too much of my life dealing with selfish, manipulative people, and I was done letting them decide what was best for me. I didn't need my ex back. I didn't need my mother's approval. I didn't need anyone who didn't actually care about me or my son. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely free after hanging up on my ex-wife. I sat in silence, letting everything settle in my mind. My mother, my ex-girlfriend, and now my ex-wife, 3 people who had all betrayed me in different ways, had expected me to accept them back into my life like nothing had happened. None of them saw anything wrong with what they had done. They only cared about what they wanted from me. I knew what would come next. My mother wasn't going to back down that easily. She would try again, maybe even bring my ex-girlfriend with her. I had no doubt she would guilt-trip me, saying I was ruining my chances at happiness, that I was throwing away a good woman who had only wanted my attention. I was done listening to her. I blocked both my ex-girlfriend and my mother's numbers. I didn't want to hear another word from either of them. If my mother showed up at my door again, she wouldn't be getting inside this time. As for my ex-wife, I knew she would try reaching out again too. Not because she truly cared, but because she had realized she had no one left. I didn't hate her. I didn't even feel anger anymore. I just didn't care. She had abandoned our son, and no amount of regret was going to change the fact that she had made that choice. For the first time in years, I felt like I had complete control over my own life. No one was going to manipulate me into making decisions that weren't mine to make. No one was going to pressure me into fixing relationships that weren't worth saving. I had one priority, my son. He was the only person who truly mattered in all of this. He had been there through everything, and he was the only one I would never turn my back on. I wasn't going to let him grow up thinking that love meant accepting betrayal. I wasn't going to let him believe that family meant allowing people to hurt you over and over again. So I moved on. I focused on raising my son, on giving him the life he deserved, and on making sure he never had to deal with the kind of people I had just cut out of mine. And as for my mother, my ex-girlfriend, and my ex-wife, they had made their choices. Now, they could live with them.